Rude Guest Hotline. Rude, the most reliable heating and air conditioning products in the DMV, is where we find our guy, Mike Florio. You know him from his work at Pro Football Talk. You see him on NBC Sports as well. Mike, you are on in the nation's capital. We appreciate a couple of minutes. How are you?
Great to be with you guys. Doing well. How are you?
Good, buddy.
Very well. Very busy weeks. There's a lot of ground to cover with you. But I actually want to start with, because we haven't talked to you since almost a month ago, we found out that DC and the Commanders were moving toward a stadium deal. We've had all kinds of council members on since, and the fight is on now to try to get this thing done. What's your take from what you've seen on the deal and whether or not you think this is going to work out in the city in DC?
Well, it was a very well-coordinated PR push to launch it. I think it helped to have the announcement of the 2027 draft in D.C. right on the heels of it. The bottom line is you've got to convince people, whether it's individually through a ballot measure, typically those now fail when they happen, or at a higher level, pulling the levers of government, getting the elected officials to support some sort of a device for coming up with the public money necessary to build one of these stadiums. Because at the end of the day, every owner looking for a stadium wants to have some degree of taxpayer money devoted to the project. Very rarely does an owner build his or her own stadium. The most recent one significantly was in LA with Stan Kroenke, but he decided, I'm going to own this, I'm going to profit from it, and I'm going to have as many events and other business activities as possible. Typically, the move is we need taxpayer money, and that's where the fight's going to be. Will DC Council approve it? Will the effort, and I assume the deadline's passed now, and I haven't seen anything about it, to put it on a June ballot. If that fails, the only way that this would be stopped, if it would be stopped, and I'm not saying it should be, but I'm just saying there are forces out there that are opposed to the idea of subsidizing multi-billionaires. If DC Council approves it, it goes through. If they don't, then they have to come up with something else.
Mike, we'll get to the specifics of the assisted runner play, tush push, brother shove, whatever you want to call it. But and I'm not ripping anybody because it wasn't just one person. The reporting seemed to be this is happening. It's going to pass. It's we're going to be without this thing, and all of a sudden they were a couple of votes shy. How did that go down?
Well, people are reporting that it's going to happen because they and we, me specifically, we were reading the tea leaves. The NFL wanted this, and what the commissioner wants, the commissioner usually gets, and the commissioner is adept at twisting the arms necessary to get to 24 when he wants to get to 24. Now, they tried to make this one look like it wasn't something that originated with the league office, but we reported immediately after the vote. The Packers were recruited by the league to do this, just like the Lions were recruited by the league to propose a new playoff seating structure because the commissioner wanted it. So the commissioner went into this round of meetings with three things he wanted. NFL active players in the Olympic flag football tournament coming up in 3 years, reseeding of the playoffs, and a ban of the tush push. And he went 1 for 3, which is good in baseball, but not when you're trying to flex your political muscles within the organization that you run.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk on Grant and Danny. So they needed 2 more teams that they couldn't get. Major progress made, though, from what was 16 teams against it to then 22 teams against it. Are we in line for this thing to go away in a year, or do you restart? Like, how do you see the future now of the tush push?
Well, it all depends on how determined the commissioner is to get rid of it. You can look at it and say, hey, we just need to get 2 more teams. And the next occasion to do it is March of 2026. We've seen in the past when the commissioner is determined to get something, he gets it. 2 years ago, he wanted to have a flex option added for Thursday Night Football. He met stiff resistance at the March meetings. By the May meetings, he got the votes he wanted. Yesterday, I think he believed he was going to get them. I think it went to a vote because he thought he was going to get them. If they didn't think they were going to get 24 votes, that thing would have been pulled, like the playoff seating proposal was. So at the end of the day, a lot of stuff happens behind the curtain, whether it's deals made, whether it's retribution for opposing the measure, whatever it may be. If he really wants 24, he's going to get there. And a lot of it also depends on what happens this year. If we see more incidents like what occurred in the NFC Championship when the Washington Commanders jumped repeatedly offside and it created that debacle where referee Sean Hockley had to eventually say, if you do it one more time, I'm awarding a touchdown. I think that was the catalyst for this most recent push against it. If that starts happening on a regular basis when a team is pressed up against its goal line, that's going to make the commissioner more determined to do it. And if they can cobble together data to support the idea that it's a safety risk, that makes it even more likely. So I don't think this effort is going to go away, especially when they get so close. When you think about it, 22 out of 32 is still more than two-thirds.
Mm-hmm.
More than two-thirds of the NFL wants to get rid of this. The only reason it's still there is because their supermajority calls for 75%, not 66.667%.
Mike Florio with us here on Grant and Danny. So I wonder, the everybody's got a different reason. Philadelphia probably wants to keep it because they're good at it, but the AFC teams maybe don't have to face it. I mean, who knows exactly what each team's motivation was, Mike, kind of to your point. But was there a sense that from what you were hearing that maybe it was a couple teams felt like they're unfairly singling out somebody in terms of Philadelphia, and if we come up with something really good, we don't want that taken away from us? Is that sense there?
That's the precedent that I think everyone would need to be concerned about, that your reward for coming up with an innovation that others both can't stop and can't duplicate, because there are two prongs to something like this.
Yeah.
Your defense should come up with a way to stop it. Your offense should come up with a way to take advantage of it. I think that if you start down that path, it doesn't bode well for the NFL, and it actually deters innovation, because if we crack the code and come up with something good, if we come up with a way to exploit the rules on the books in our favor, they're going to take it away from us. I think the bigger issue is this thing was mishandled by the league from the get-go. Back in 2006, when they changed the rule that previously prevented pushing of a player anywhere on the field, that planted the seeds for this. It was almost like a 17-year cicada. It took 16 years for the Eagles to eventually weaponize this thing and build it into their playbook and use it on a regular basis. And that's when the league should have done it. In 2022, after that season, the league should have said, hey, whoa. We never intended, when we took away a rule that primarily addressed downfield near the sticks or near the goal line, effort by an offensive lineman to come shove the runner to where he was trying to go. We never intended that to be turned into something that's going to activate at the line of scrimmage. We need to get rid of this now. The fact that they waited and the Eagles got so dominant at it, that's what created this perception that the Eagles have found this thing that they've repeatedly used, and now there's enough people who are resentful of it and scared of it, frankly, that they were able to cobble together a bunch of cockamamie reasons. It's the safety issue. Where's the data? We don't have any. It could be a safety issue. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, it doesn't look like football. How about that? It just felt like a disingenuous exercise to come up with what they should have done when this all started and said, we never meant that rule change from 2006 to be used like this.
Terrific NFL guest and insider Mike Florio is with us here on Grant and Danny. Pro Football Talk is where you can find his work. Of course, NBC television as well. Mike, how about the reseeding opportunity that is no more? Am I misunderstanding? Did that not even get voted on? Did the Lions just pull that off the table? What happened there?
The Lions proposed it in March, and it got pulled or tabled to May. And I think they believed they were going to get 24 votes. And then when they realized that wasn't going to happen, it got withdrawn. This was another one the commissioner wanted. Rod Wood, the Lions president, admitted after the March meetings that the league approached them to do this. And this comes from a very simple belief. And I don't think that it logically fits, and I don't think in practice it would ever bear it out. The idea that if you have straight seeding without regard to division championship, your late season games, week 17, week 18, when teams have settled into a seed, hey, I know I've won my division, I'm not going to be any worse than the third seed or the fourth seed. You rest players and you create less compelling games. The argument is, if everything's up for grabs 1 through 7, you're going to have more compelling games because everyone's going to be sprinting all the way through to the wire and no one's going to rest starters. You know, the week 18 games this year, other than the games played on Saturday, which weren't as compelling, the Sunday night game, extremely compelling. The Sunday afternoon games, week 18 this year, stunk. There was nothing, or at a minimum, very minimal potential playoff consequences. And I think if they're ever going to do this, the bigger problem that it speaks to is if you're going to determine the playoff seeding in a conference, 1 through 7, based only on record, you better take a step back and look at your scheduling formula. And you better come up with more ways to have more games in the conference between the teams in the conference that are ultimately going to have this apples-to-apples comparison. And I think that conversation needs to be had anyway. Too much of the scheduling is premised on variety and rotation. 8 of your 17 games are based on a rotation that takes you through the 4 divisions of the AFC. If you're in the NFC East, you play all 4 teams of the AFC East one year, NFC or AFC North the next year, AFC South the next year, AFC West the next year, and then there's a rotation in the NFC, the other 3 divisions. You play all 4 teams from one of those divisions every year. That's 8 of your games. It's based on this rotation aimed at ensuring that there's as much variety over time as possible. If you're a season ticket holder, over 8 years, you'll see every team in the league at one time or another. I think if we're going to tear down the walls of the divisions, they need to be more sensitive to the fact that there needs to be more head-to-head play among the teams that ultimately are going to be stacked up 1 through 7.
So, Mike, you referenced both the NFC Championship game moment with the 9,000 offsides, and I would point to another moment we're talking about playoff reseeding, in fact, involving Washington, when they were terrible, 7-9, and they hosted a playoff game. They're usually moments that are almost catalysts for these kinds of rule changes. I guess my question is pretty broad, but what does it take for enough embarrassment or enough like, oh my God, that can't happen again? I think of that the pass interference that should have been called Rams New Orleans Saints. They said, yeah, we'll review pass interference penalties for a little while, just because they were so upset about that individual moment. Of course, they ended up repealing that. But why didn't we reach those thresholds there? And kind of what does it take in general? Walk us through that.
Well, I think it all starts with someone getting the idea, whether it's based upon media coverage, perception of embarrassment, or someone just doesn't like it. I think it just has to reach a critical mass that causes someone to say, we need to do this. And the fact that the effort to get a proposal from a team instead of going through the normal process that's in place to have the competition committee look at it and talk to people about it, formulate a proposal, take it to ownership. We always hear how powerful and influential the competition committee is. Why are they running behind that and instigating teams to make these proposals for things the league office wants? And, I'm a firm believer in Occam's razor because my brain is typically equipped only to understand things in the most simplest terms. I think it's reasonable to conclude that as to the playoff seeding, the commissioner didn't like that there were so many games in Week 18 where teams rested their starters. Hell, the Rams gladly accepted falling from 3 to 4 on the playoff tree, even though it meant they were going to face either the Lions or the Vikings. They were confident they could beat them, so they rested their starters in Week 18. All it takes is one thing for the commissioner to say, we need something better than that. And with the Tush push, and here's why I think this. Not long after the NFC Championship, Mike Pereira, who was the VP of officiating for years and now is the Fox Sports rules analyst, he said because of that moment from Washington, Philadelphia, they're going to take another run at getting rid of the Tush push. And I'm like, but why would you take a look at getting rid of a rule simply because you don't like the way that one team tried to stop a play that no one can stop? But I think it's as simple as this. The commissioner wanted playoff reseeding. The commissioner wanted the Tush push out, and he went 0 for 2 on those.
Mike, what do you remember going back to 2022 here? We talked about this earlier in the show. I know you wrote a lot about this then, even wrote something about it in the last 24 hours. Jim Irsay was the only owner that came out publicly and said that they should vote to remove Dan Snyder. And we played some of the audio today, but he was a hero here in D.C. when he did that. And I know there's plenty of stories in all directions on Irsay's life, but that's probably how in D.C. he's going to be remembered. Why do you think he broke ranks? Was he just a wild card? And how much did that actually matter?
There was a lot that was gurgling among ownership ranks about Daniel Snyder, the Beth Wilkinson investigation that stopped short of a recommendation that he be compelled to sell because the league said, and I think your station did some reporting in this regard, that somebody found the written report that the NFL never wanted because the NFL didn't want it in writing that Snyder should be compelled to sell. That happened in 2021. By 2022, this was still kind of out there. I think the spark for Irsay was the ESPN report from right around the same time that Snyder supposedly had dirt on multiple owners, dirt on the commissioner, and he was going to use that if anybody dared to come after him. And it's as simple as Irsay saying, well, hell, I don't care. Everybody knows my dirt. You're going to threaten me with something like that? And I think there may have been a level of indignation over this idea that Snyder would dare to threaten his business partners. That may have been the thing that caused Jim Irsay to go off. And he went off multiple times, and he was not backing down, and he didn't care. He said what needed to be said. He said what people in the room were thinking, but no one had the guts to stand up and say it. And I think it was great that he did. And within a year after he said what he said, Snyder was gone.
Small matter just of regular football stuff. Will George Pickens work out in Dallas?
There are reasons to think he will, and there are reasons to think he won't. The reason to think he won't is every time the Steelers have decided they had enough of a receiver, that guy never really does much anywhere else. If anything, it falls apart for him. Look at what happened with Antonio Brown. Look at what happened with the kid from Notre Dame, number 11, Chase Claypool. Took me a little while to remember his name. They got a high second-round pick. It became essentially the last pick in round one that year because the Dolphins had lost their first-rounder for tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton. 32nd overall pick for Chase Claypool, and he never did anything with the Bears. So there's reason to think it won't work. Here's the reason to think it will work. George Pickens has never had a good quarterback. George Pickens has never played in an offense that sought to maximize his talents and get the most out of what he can do. And I think of Randy Moss. When he went from the Raiders to the Patriots, we had all thought Randy Moss was done. Randy Moss was playing with quarterbacks. And there's one guy he played with in 2006 that I've even forgotten he existed. That's how bad their quarterbacks were. He goes to Tom Brady the next year and Josh McDaniels and that offense in New England. He has one of the great single receiving seasons of all time. And that's the other thing Pickens has never had in Pittsburgh. Someone to take attention away from him. Someone to take heat off of him. They're going to have their hands full defending CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens this year. So there's a chance this works out very well, and the Steelers look foolish for giving him up for only a third-round pick in 2026.
All right, Mike, we'll let you out on this one. Last one. Joe Burrow complained about the Bengals not having international games the other day. Said he's done a lot to grow the game. I don't know exactly what he's referencing, but I'm guessing he's gone on trips or something, and he's upset that he hasn't had an international game. Is that how most guys feel? I get the sense that they view it as a pain in the butt and don't want to do it. Do a lot of players like the games?
I think he's in the minority when it comes to international play. It is wild to think that of the two Ohio teams, they picked the Browns instead of the Bengals this year. But it's rare to hear that. And you know what? The NFL is going to seize on that because they are determined to continue this. The Vikings getting 2 back-to-back road games in both Ireland and London this year, and they play them consecutively. That's the start of what's going to be a new trend. I think as soon as next year, you'll have 2 or 3 teams that do that. Before too long, there'll be 4 teams that do that. And some think that this is all the test case to see how the logistics will work for the teams that will be traveling to Europe to play one or more teams that are located there permanently at some point in the future.
Mike, pleasure as always, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, always very good with us. I didn't even put him on hold that time before he was 88 out in the gate.
You're not going to have a chance with Mike Florio.
One of the quickest in the game on the hang-up.
He and Mike Lombardi are the two the top couple seats.
I think he's moved ahead. Lombardi was the 1 seat. Now Lombardi's the GM of the University of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So he's taken orders from Bill Belichick's girlfriend. But I think Florio's probably jumped past him on the quickest hang-up in the biz.
So do you think it's landline, finger hovered over the button to hang up, to end the call?
Well, that's a cell phone, so there's definitely no landline. I mean, you could tell that was cell phone. I think it's just, all right, you got it, guys, end. As soon as
that's quick.
I think he said his thank you. I thanked him. He thanked us. Whatever's after that's not his problem.
But I 100% agree. We're talking about a quick exit.
I'm just saying, that's his.
You go from ear to you got to look at the screen, move your thumb, and hit end. He's quicker than everyone else. That's kind of the point.
He's probably got one of those buttons on the side of the phone you can hit that ends the call.
There you go.
That's probably he's a side of the phone button.
Side of the phone guy.
Might have to be.